Hi, everyone. Welcome to the SYL Podcast, where we highlight the voices of Asian American leaders, artists, and community members making an impact here in Seattle. My name is Andrew, and I'm a participant in the Seattle Youth Leadership Program, also known as SYLP. This year, our theme is Bridging the Gap, reconnecting with our cultures and communities through this podcast. I'll be speaking with people who are doing just that, reconnecting with generations, preserving cultural roots, and helping our communities grow stronger together. In today's episode, I'll be talking with how do you pronounce it?
You just say YK.
Trying to say
YK's fine.
okay.
Yeah,
I was
that's
like
fine.
contemplating like how do you like
Yeah,
pronounce it and stuff. Okay,
it's my full government name right there. It's Yongkang. But
Yongkang
you can call me
Yongkang
YK.
Yongkang Zhou, right?
Zhao. Yep.
Zhao, yeah,
Yep.
Yongkang Zhao, also known as YK. He's the Clean and Green Program Manager at CIDBIA, the Chinatown's International District Business Improvement Area. We'll dive into his work in the community, the challenges and beauty of our community, keep the beauty of keeping our neighborhood vibrant, and what it means to build bridges between the past and the present. So then, let's get started. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your cultural background?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Yongkang Zhao. I also go by YK. So a little bit about my cultural background is that I am a first generation kind of Chinese immigrant. So I wasn't born in the U.S. My family and I were originally born in southern China, and then we immigrated here when I was at a really young age.
Mm-hmm.
I think like 5 years old. But I can confidently say that most of my childhood was spent kind of growing up here in Seattle, particularly South Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to school, in the south end of Seattle, whether that's, Franklin High School, Mercer Middle School, and then making my way to UW. So have a lot of cultural roots here in
Mm-hmm.
the city. A lot of my childhood was spent, not only kind of in South Seattle, but also in Chinatown, just because at that time when you were young, this was like kind of like mid 2000s, 2010s. There really wasn't any like other spots culturally where a lot of Asians could kind of gather, where there's a lot of, a lot of cool Asian, food restaurants or, cool hangout spots. It was a lot of it was all centralized in Chinatown,
Mm-hmm.
especially like 10, 15 years ago. So really just kind of growing up here, my family kind of laying the roots in the city, in the neighborhood, and then in Seattle as well. So there's just some quick bio about kind of my background and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah. So, what does your cultural identity mean to you today?
Yeah, I think cultural identity is really important. For me, it means that, still kind of being intact and being in touch with um, kind of my heritage and my
Yeah.
culture. And I feel that kind of right now, like as we are kind of progressing, I feel like it's kind of harder to kind of track and oh, so
That was my mom.
I know you're good. No, sometimes I feel like right now it's kind of hard with social media, a lot of things kind of going on. I feel like right now it's kind of hard for people to kind of keep in touch with that cultural side of their heritage. But I think it means a lot because my family's lineage, right, and kind of when they came over to the U.S., one thing that wasn't lost when they immigrated here was kind of their cultural background and kind of cultural relevancy. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the holidays that we celebrate in the family and the household, we still do that. You kind of see it with our neighborhood events like the Lunar New Year event. Like we still, put on those events and try to still celebrate and highlight, celebrations, holidays, in our culture, in our heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that's so important. And hopefully that doesn't get lost in, translation or over time is
Yeah.
people still have something that they can kind of, go into, tie into,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're, talking with family, talking with friends, and that's a really key important component of, everyone's kind of like individual life is to have, cultural, have a culture that they can always kind of go back to or kind
Yeah.
of have it rooted in their kind of, identity and who they are. So really important.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to get involved with the community work in the Chinatown International District?
Yeah, so I've been involved in a lot of programs in the CID for a really long time. So kind of going back to kind of, where I grew up. So I live in South Seattle growing up. And then, but a lot of my time, a lot of my youth was spent in the Chinatown International District. So going back all the way to elementary school, after school programs, there used to be I don't know if there's still a thing, but at the Chinese Information Services Center, CISC,
Mm-hmm.
they used to have a youth kind of after school program. And so every day during elementary school, I would get dropped off to that center, and I would be able to kind of learn, different languages or learn about different courses.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, we would be able to interact with other youth from the Seattle area. And then middle school, I joined Interim CDA, which is another nonprofit organization in the neighborhood. They had a youth program called Wilderness and Leadership Program, or Wilderness and Leadership Development. Sorry,
Oh,
it's
okay.
called the Wild Program.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a part of that too between middle school to high school, and then senior year I was in your shoes. I was a student at the Seattle Youth Leadership Program as well.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, my background is that I've been so involved heavily in a lot of kind of youth programs, and a lot of my kind of my culture, my identity kind of is rooted in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of it only kind of felt right that, once I graduated college and kind of I was looking for things that kind of aligned with what I wanted to do, what I was passionate about, kind of things kind of fell into place where I had an opportunity to come back into the CID neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
contribute, work in the neighborhood, and I had so much familiarity with kind of a lot of the different programs, the different organizations, the people in the neighborhood already.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that kind of everything aligned itself, and yeah, it's been great working in the neighborhood so far. So
Yeah, that sounds really great. Can you tell us about your role as a clean and green program manager?
yeah, for sure. So I work as a clean and green program manager for the Chinatown International District Business Improvement Area. And so my role, heavily focuses on the sanitation side of the neighborhood. And so one of the things that, one of the main core components that we do is we hire um, private contractors, sanitation contractors to help clean the neighborhood every single day,
Mm-hmm.
7 days a week. And so one of my biggest jobs is to kind of manage and coordinate the sanitation work that they do. So that involves, going around the neighborhood every single day, morning, afternoon, walking around, identifying, hotspots, sanitation hotspots, and then kind of, working with our contractors to kind of figure out what's the best, solution or best kind of method of removing certain messes, right? And then also just kind of like, figuring out to ourselves how can we make the process more easier, more easy, more better for them to kind of understand like where they should be kind of focusing a lot of their time and cleaning on,
Mm-hmm.
because there are certain hotspots throughout the neighborhood, and every single day those hotspots get dirty again. And so kind of knowing and figuring out kind of like what are the methods, and kind of figuring out what are the solutions to addressing sanitation through our hired sanitation contractors is a big part of our job.
Mm-hmm.
Some other things that I do is I try to involve the community a whole lot. So I help manage a lot of our neighborhood community cleanups. So we do monthly CID community cleanups on the second Saturday every
Mm-hmm.
single month from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. in Hing Hay Park. We, all gather together as volunteers, and everyone kind of goes out into the neighborhood helping to remove litter. I'm also involved with, setting up and organizing our annual CID Spring Clean event, which is, I think, the largest volunteer event in the neighborhood
Oh, wow.
every single year. So we gather about 180 to 200 plus volunteers to the neighborhood every single year, and it's not just activities like picking up litter, but we have activities where we're helping local small businesses. We're helping them repaint their storefronts.
Mm-hmm.
There's activities where we're working with Parks and Rec to clean up different parks, re-bulk and kind of like apply new mulching to their trees and to kind of some of the landscape areas.
Mm-hmm.
There's been activities where we've been partnering with other organizations where we're helping, clean the Danny Wu Garden, or helping with composting activities with Restaurants to Garden.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of fun activities and activations. So that's the other thing that I do. And then I would say the kind of the last part of my job is the green side, which is kind of like the more beautification activation side. So a lot of the murals in the neighborhood, is something that our organization and our partners have worked on. So if you ever pass by Oasis and you see those big four panels of art, that's something that I worked on back in late 2022. And then if you ever go up to Neomachi Terrace in Japantown at Maynard and Main, there's that fish mural that kind of wraps around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of working on that project actually late last year with an amazing artist called Tori Shao. She worked
Mm-hmm.
on both of those projects. And
Yeah.
something else that I'm currently working on is installing cigarette butt containers in the neighborhood. It's a long time coming, and we're finally getting the ball rolling on that project. So, just trying to figure out ways to improve sanitation, reduce the amount of messes that people see on the streets, and hopefully that can kind of attract more visitors and make the community feel more clean, feel more safe, and feel
Mm-hmm.
more inviting to everyone.
Yeah. So, what are the challenges that you face when keeping the district clean and safe?
Yeah, so I think one of the big challenges for kind of our organization is kind of budget. So we're a business improvement area, and so we get a lot of our funding, through kind of internal assessment values from the neighborhood. But
Mm-hmm.
one thing that, has been evident is that our internal funding hasn't been able to kind of keep up with inflation, and it frankly hasn't been updated since the late 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of imagine like the rates and what people were paying back then, and that same number of that same cost of rates is what people are paying today. So although it's good that businesses and stakeholders in the neighborhood aren't having to pay that much, as an organization we have to look at external funding a lot. So we rely heavily on city government funding, but then we also have to, look at all available grants,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to apply for a lot of them. And every single year, it's a struggle to try to find and try to keep the same level and amount of funding that's available to kind of support our current services, whether that's sanitation, whether that's public safety ambassadors. So the big challenge every single year, once August till November comes around is scrambling to try to figure out where are we getting our funding from, where are we getting our source of revenue that we can then put in to our services, which will ultimately then benefit the community. So that's always been the biggest challenge. The other challenge is that frankly we're a really small team.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's we do really important work in the neighborhood, sanitation, public safety, marketing, and all the big CID events in the neighborhood, whether that's the Lunar New Year event, the night market event,
Mm-hmm.
and the food walks that happen throughout the year, and then also managing, I think, the CID Seattle, a lot of our social media and websites that kind of uplift small businesses and the community as a whole. We're only a team of three, so it's a really small team, and we're trying to do a lot of work, and so it's a big challenge for us to try to balance all of that, and then additionally because we're such a small team, all of us are involved in applying for grants, reporting grants, and just doing so much work, with the details and whatnot, with the coordination.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say those are probably the two biggest challenges to kind of my work and kind of as an organization as a whole is that, we don't get a lot of funding every single year, and so we're really trying our hardest to try to find all available funding and try to secure those funding resources and then put those into our programs that benefit the community. And then I would say the second thing is that we're a really small team, and we try to get a lot of work done, and
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes that can be challenging, but we just try to keep it going, keep it pushing, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully things all work out.
Yeah,
So.
so about the businesses, because I seen like a couple of your posters plastered around like local
Yeah.
restaurants. How do you collaborate with these businesses or community members in your efforts?
Yeah, so I would say in terms of collaboration, I think with CID businesses in particular, I think the demographics is that a lot of them are kind of older generation,
Mm-hmm.
business owners, and a lot of them kind of have a language barrier where there a lot of them, speak Taishanese, Cantonese, Vietnamese, there's not a lot of business owners that, are proficient in English, especially English as their kind of first native language. And a lot of them are, again, our older generation. So what we've kind of realized is that the best way to kind of communicate with them, collaborate with them is literally just going in their store and just striking up a conversation with them. That's the best way to kind of communicate and interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
What we kind of realize is that, number one, that makes those interactions more organic. And a lot of them, a lot of times, like we also send emails out to a lot of businesses. We contact, businesses through like, the telephone number and other kind of methods, whether it's monthly newsletters and other kind of formats. But what we found is that the most direct way and easiest way to talk to them is just going in their store,
Mm-hmm.
seeing them, in person, and then just kind of, giving giving information about what you want to, see done or collaborate with them and whatnot. And then usually that kind of, starts to kind of build that relationship and build that rapport. And then maybe like over time, they'll respond more easily to your text, to your messages,
Mm-hmm.
to your emails. So I think that's a really good way. And I think one of the biggest examples of kind of collaborating with small businesses is our summer series of our food walk programs because it involves talking and communicating with, you know, over 50 businesses in the neighborhood and trying to all figure out like what are some special dishes and promotions that you can offer to
Mm-hmm.
kind of attract, more customers. So that's kind of like an ongoing conversation that we always have every single year, every single month, when we try to have these food walk activations. So yeah, I think it's just going inside the store, talking to the business owner, being honest. Like, obviously they see a lot of the same challenges that that we all see.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think just kind of meeting them on a more personal level, a more organic level, and I think really kind of starting from that point will then open up other kind of forms and methods of communication down the line.
Yeah. So have you seen your work help reconnect people to their cultural roots at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of going back to the cleanups,
Mm-hmm.
I think when I first started kind of reactivating the cleanups in 2022, we were kind of coming off of the pandemic. And so that first year I did, volunteer cleanups. There weren't a whole lot of interest in those like, activations and kind of community volunteer events. I think
Mm-hmm.
we maybe averaged like around 10 to 20 volunteers every single month in time. But then kind of gradually as we started kind of being consistent with the cleanups, having them every single month, and then also kind of offering cleanup opportunities during the weekdays to, local schools, local organizations, local companies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, different clubs. We started kind of getting a lot more engagement and a lot more interest from, not only people like outside of Seattle or just from the greater Seattle area, but also within the community. Local organizations like One World Now, local organizations like schools that we have in the neighborhood. We've done cleanups with a lot of their students as well. So kind of gaining and drawing that interest into, looking to give back into the community, I think has been wonderful. And kind of over the years, we've been, gaining a lot more interest from cultural groups. So there's been a lot of like kind of youth leadership groups and youth or Asian American kind of led cultural groups that have kind of joined a lot of our events, helping to volunteer, clean the neighborhood. So I think we've kind of done a great job in kind of getting a lot more of those people to come back into the community to give back
Mm-hmm.
into the CID. And then especially kind of with the work that my colleague Gina does in terms of marketing and events. It's been great to kind of see a lot of the big turnouts to our, large neighborhood events, Lunar New Year and the night market. A lot of our vendors are also Asian Americans, and a lot of the products, the food that they offer that they're serving, is related to kind of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of to be able to see kind of all of that come together over the past couple of years, through my lens has most definitely been incredible to see, and hopefully we see that continue to grow and kind of foster moving forward.
Yeah. So since our theme mainly revolves around bridging the gap, what does that term mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think bridging the gap, um, for me, I think I see it as kind of like a generational gap.
Mm-hmm.
I think is one of the big things. So within our neighborhood, within the CID, a lot of business owners, a lot of residents that live in the neighborhood are kind of
Mm-hmm.
older generation immigrants. Maybe from like the mid to late 90s, or like sorry, maybe between like 1950s to early 2000s. A lot of them are kind of from that generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I'm kind of observing and seeing is that, a lot of the younger generation, whether it's my time or, folks in your time, is that there's kind of that slight divide where, back then there really wasn't a whole lot of areas or places to be in if you wanted to kind of meet other Asian Americans that kind of, look like you or from the same culture.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, a lot of that area was heavily centered in the CID, but nowadays, we have a lot of, different Asian grocery stores, Asian restaurants, kind of all throughout Seattle, and especially kind of in the suburbs, whether, it's in the east side, or if you go further south in Renton, Kent, and then obviously there's Asian restaurants throughout Seattle nowadays. But I think one of the big things in terms of bridging that gap is how do you kind of how can you kind of get that younger generation, which might not be as intact or might not be as involved in kind of their culture and heritage, especially kind of surrounding the CID.
Mm-hmm.
How can you kind of bridge that gap and the current gap of or and the current kind of the group of the older generation and the older Asian American members that have lived and worked in the CID for decades and generations. How do you kind of get those two groups to kind of all come together and celebrate one single culture and heritage? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that kind of goes back into the work that that we do as an organization, whether that's putting on events, whether that's having different volunteering opportunities, whether that's having community gatherings, community events, like how do we kind of get those two demographics to all come together as one and celebrate, the good moments and all the good heritage and culture things that, we each kind of have to show. And then obviously the work that we do as a community, how do we celebrate wins in our community, So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the big thing about kind of bridging the gap is that demographic divide. How do we get kind of, especially more of that younger generation to, be more in touch and be more in tune with, the what we have kind of been going on and the neighborhood and having a cultural hub,
Mm-hmm.
because especially, once we kind of start getting into that, next generation, a lot of that culture and identity that, a lot of the older generation have kind of kept is eventually going to get lost. So how can we kind of infuse that and teach that to the next generation and especially kind of the younger generations?
Yeah. Have you ever felt cultural disconnection throughout your own life or work?
Uh, I would say a little bit. I think kind of like as you're kind of growing up in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Or just kind of growing up in the States, um, I think especially kind of through school, if you kind of aren't actively kind of participating in kind of programs or clubs or organizations that kind of have a cultural connection or link to kind of you personally, that can be kind of lost. And so definitely kind of like, throughout school, there's a lot of kind of there's so many different programs and so many different clubs and they're just, there's a lot going on in I'm assuming in everyone's life. And sometimes, you might kind of lose that connection to your culture, to your heritage, to kind of what kind of links you to, your family and kind of that side.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I think growing up in middle school in particular, when I was trying to figure myself out, there was like a moment and period of time where I kind of like felt slightly ashamed or kind of slightly embarrassed to kind of have like that cultural side, especially kind of whether that's kind of celebrating my parents or sorry not my parents but my family's kind of like culture, whether they have like holidays, that require me to do, something different, or I have to dedicate a certain amount of time to, support their, celebration or holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And then that started affecting kind of like my life throughout middle school, throughout high school, throughout my academics. Like maybe there was a time kind of when I felt that way, but then kind of as I started kind of becoming more mature, especially kind of in high school, and then started having a level of appreciation for culture rather than kind of to have disdain, or rather than to kind of have like separation where I'm like trying to separate myself from that side. I've been kind of learning to embrace kind of my cultural side because it's kind of what distinguishes kind of yourself, from kind of everyone else, and it's something that you yourself don't have, or that you sorry that you yourself have that others can't kind of take away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I've kind of had to learn over time to appreciate, rather than to kind of push away.
Yeah. So, what are ways young people like SYLP students can help bridge that cultural or generational gap?
Yeah, I think number one, I think you guys being part of SYLP is a great start, and I
Mm-hmm.
think you guys have been touring a lot of different community groups, community organizations, and at the
Mm-hmm.
same time talking with a lot of community leaders. So I think the one big thing kind of for not just SYLP students, but kind of for that younger generation, is to try to be involved in the community,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's starting small, whether that's just eating in the neighborhood, whether, going getting dim sum with your family on the weekends, or, in the morning times, or, going to the CID to just buy bubble tea, or just kind of walking around the neighborhood. It kind of really starts out, small in terms of just, shopping in the neighborhood, being in the neighborhood, and just kind of having a presence, to start is, I think, a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can kind of start wrapping up by kind of being involved in different organizations. So, whether that's kind of touring the Wing Luke Museum and kind of better understanding the history from back then, to kind of volunteering for, let's say a volunteer cleanup, or volunteering for a lot of different community events. Because it's not just the CIDBIA that has community events, but there's tons of other, great community organizations like SKIPTA, Interim, CISE. Um, there's so many different community organizations that all have different activations throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think kind of being involved in a lot of those, I think, is a great way. And then I think, just being kind of informed about kind of all the challenges and things that are going on affecting the neighborhood. I think it's a really good way to kind of to be engaged, and to also at the same time kind of know what's going on. So
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend, a couple of newspapers. I think the Northwest Asian Weekly, is a good one. International Examiner is another good one. Um, Not so much, but I think the Seattle Chinese Post will occasionally kind of also mention, things going on in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just kind of following, especially for the younger generation, I would say like following social media, kind of being in tune with kind of challenges in terms of, and also kind of what's going on in the neighborhood, I think is a good way to be engaged and to kind of stay up to date. But yeah, I think it literally starts as simple as just being in the neighborhood, having a good time, meeting friends for lunch, breakfast, dinner, or just getting bubble tea, and then kind of working your way up to kind of being more involved. I think that's a great way. That's a great start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, who were your mentors or role models growing up?
Yeah, I think my mentors, I've had a bunch, but I think kind of my biggest one is, kind of my parents. When they kind of came out here with me and immigrated, they've been just last 30 plus years. They've just been grinding, working hard, every single day and night.
Mm-hmm.
My mom especially, when we came out here, she took ESL classes to kind of, improve her English because she didn't speak any at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so while she was taking ESL classes, she was also picking me up from elementary school as a child, and then on top of that, she was also working, at that time, I think working in hotels, as kind of like the maintenance person, helping to fix rooms afterwards. So she was doing a lot of that and balancing, so many different challenges while at the same time, taking care of me and picking me up from school when I was a little kid. And then my dad's been, working in the restaurant business for so long as a chef.
Mm-hmm.
And both of my parents, even to this day, they work 10 plus hours every single day, daytime until nighttime without, a whole lot of rest. And, very rarely when they do, get a day off, during their week, a lot of it is, then they have to start, doing, helping out, in the house or with whatever challenges are going on. And so, for me, like my biggest motivators and mentors have definitely kind of, been my parents. Just kind of me observing how hard they work,
Mm-hmm.
and how much they sacrifice, every single day in and day out for like the last 20, 30 years. It's really impressive. And then, another mentor of mine is kind of my cousin. They were out here, in Seattle before I immigrated here. But when I first got here, they were the first ones to kind of teach me about, all the different cultural nuances and the cultural differences between, kind of how it is out here in the States versus
Mm-hmm.
kind of how it was back then when I was a little kid in China. So they taught me a whole lot about the culture. They taught me and kind of show me a lot of, their fun, spots to hang out at, kind of their friends and whatnot. So, truly, they're another, group of mentors and people that I really look up
Yeah.
towards. Yeah,
Since we have like 6 minutes left,
yeah,
if you could give one message to the next generation of Asian American youth, what would it be?
yeah. I think my main message would be um, to not shy away from, being involved and celebrating your culture, your heritage. Your culture and your heritage is the one thing that really ties you and
Mm-hmm.
really helps to contribute to your individualism and kind of who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of I would say like in this kind of day and age where, there's a lot of different cultural activations and there's a lot of different like, Asian restaurants and food cultures and everything like that kind of all spread throughout the city, and it's no longer, just centered in the CID. I really hope that the next generation kind of, stays in tune, in touch with, that one unique cultural neighborhood, in Seattle, and just kind of, not just in Seattle, but also kind of in a lot of your big, cities and, throughout America, throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no place, such as kind of the Chinatowns, the Japantowns, the Little Saigons. Like these are like some of the main cultural hubs that was the only place for especially the older generation to kind of all meet, gather, have a good time,
Mm-hmm.
have a good meal. Like those are the only places back then, where folks could kind of all gather all together, in one place.
Mm-hmm.
So really for the next generation, I hope that they can, you know, not take that for granted and really appreciate kind of those areas, those cultures and community leaders that have kind of been there since day one, and to
Mm-hmm.
really kind of, stay in touch, stay in tune, and contribute kind of whatever you can, whether, it's as simple as just eating there or just being there, walking around the community. So really hope that, the next generation can really embrace that and don't be shy of embracing kind of that cultural side again, that
Mm-hmm.
heritage side. Always have a deep appreciation for it. And yeah, pretty much it. And have fun and yeah.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the SYL Podcast. A big thank you to YK for sharing his story and insights with us. His work in the International District reminds us that bridging the gap doesn't always mean big gestures. It can be as simple as keeping our spaces clean, listening to our elders, and making sure our communities feel cared for. If this episode resonated with you, I hope it encourages you to reflect on your own cultural identity and how you might reconnect with your roots or your community. Thanks again for listening. This is the SYL Podcast, Bridging the Gap, one story at a time.